Hello.
Hi there, and welcome everyone to our first live stream from this run of Caring for Vulnerable Children. Thanks for joining us. If you're joining us live or watching the recording afterwards, we'll start by doing the introduction. So my guess is if you've got to week 2 at this point, you'll know who I am by now. My name's Ray McPhee. I'm based here at the University of Strathclyde, and I'm the lead educator on the programme.
And hi there, my name's John Paul Fitzpatrick. I'm an honorary research fellow here at Strathclyde, and you'll be encountering more of me and my dulcet tones as we progress through the course later on.
Okay, so thanks for joining us, John Paul. Also, we'll get 3 live streams as we go through the programme, weeks 2, weeks 4, and week 6, and it allows us to kind of engage with learners and their comments, their questions, their posts as we go through the course. Now, the learners taking part in this won't necessarily know, but also, we're on our 6th run of this programme now, and it's great that it's as vibrant as ever. We've got more than 5,000 people signed up for it.
I think this is the best cohort yet. Yeah. You are definitely the best in terms of your engagement and your response to the course so far. So keep it up. You've got a track record there for them to beat, Graham. So let's hope they keep that up.
So literally hundreds, thousands of comments. So I guess we can always start these sessions by making a bit of a disclaimer. We're not going to be able to respond to every comment and every question, but we've got a list of stuff that we've pulled out here from the first 2 weeks, and it just gives us the chance to begin to kind of unpack kind of some of the things we've been thinking about and kind of have a bit of a chat about it. And if you're listening to and watching this, be it live or recording, then keep the discussion going. Post more comments. I mean, you won't necessarily agree with everything that we say in the session here today. We do want it to be thought provoking. So post comments on the page and let's keep the discussion going. We've got quite a lot we'd like to get through today. So just going to give people a sense of what we're going to cover. We're going to spend a bit of time talking about the poll results. You remember there was a poll with 10 scenarios in week 1, and we asked you to pick 3 of those and kind of give you a reason. So we're going to talk about kind of some of those results. Next time we're going to move on to, we've got some, I guess, just kind of some general questions that people have been asking in advance of this session here today. So we're going to try and respond to some of them. We're going to talk a little bit about Billy's story. The learners are now into week 2 there, and we're seeing different things happening and lots of different comments. So we're going to talk about that. And then we're going to finish up by just kind of talking about kind of some of the more general statistics about children and poverty. As always, that discussion generates a lot of comments, and we've had that, and kind of very topical. There's a report out today in England and Wales that we're going to mention, and just kind of some of the stuff that goes about in relation to that. So that's our plan for the next 40 minutes or so. So let's start with the poll. So obviously, you were given 10 scenarios, and you were asked to pick 3 that you thought involved the most vulnerability or risk, to select those 3. I'd select 3 and give you reasons why. Now the results are up on the page now. If you go into the week 2 page, you'll see that they've been posted along with some comments with myself. I'm not going to read all the results out one by one. I do just have time here, so I would just encourage people to go onto the page and do that. But as always, there's kind of some interesting kind of patterns kind of coming out of this, and generally, I mean, there's 3 or 4 scenarios that generate kind of far more response than any other. And probably, I guess, fair to say as well, to John Paul, is a bit of a kind of precursor to this, that this is very much an academic, a learner, a student exercise. If these 10 scenarios all existed in reality, it wouldn't be a case of saying to a social worker, you can only intervene in 3, or social work services can only think about intervening in 3. But I guess what we're just encouraging people to think about is, well, what are the sorts of scenarios that cause more alarm bells to ring?
Yes, I think we've probably been a bit naughty in picking some scenarios that are forcing you to think critically about your response to risk, to your concepts of how you prioritise, and I suppose seeing sets of issues which impact on children and young people across the globe daily. So, and of course, the level of information you would normally have working as a social worker or a residential care worker, child and youth care worker, would be far more in terms of the assessment process. So we have been naughty, so thank you very much for getting into the assessment, and they have with such passion in the forums and the posts that have been concerned. But in true Oscar style reporting from the Oscars with the right envelopes, can you talk us through the number one issue and what you thought of the response to it, Graham?
So the scenario that generated the most response, and I mean quite a degree of kind of consistency here. So scenario one, a tiny baby who has been given a violent shaking by their carer, who has learning difficulties and is upset because the baby won't stop crying. So 82% of the participants picked that in their top three. And I guess our initial reaction to that is we're not surprised at that. When we look at that scenario, I guess kind of various kind of risks and vulnerabilities kind of jumping out at us. That's a tiny baby who kind of no agency for themselves in terms of totally dependent for care and protection on others, and their carer has learning difficulties and is upset because the baby won't stop crying, and perhaps suggesting about the carer's understanding of what's going on and what is either going to be comforting or soothing or actually potentially damaging or dangerous for the child. So these kind of two things kind of coming together, creating a double-edged sword in terms of risk and vulnerability. And I guess I don't know kind of if it's part of people's thought process, but there's a degree of vulnerability about the carer in this scenario as well, in terms of the kind of what's the carer's level of understanding with regards to kind of the risk and protection of the child, the care needs of the baby, and is there a risk to the carer themselves or them finding themselves in a situation where they're being blamed or getting into trouble for the way they're looking after the child. So not a great surprise that's number one.
No, not at all. And I think probably looking at the poll results, probably most of my surprise and intrigue, and I do like to play devil's advocate, but I suppose comes from the ones that didn't get much love or attention from yourselves. So if I could be so bold as to just to explore some of the ones that get very, very few, and just to kind of, I suppose, show some of the intricacies that have to be made in terms of understanding that bigger picture. So the one that got one of the lowest results was the 8-year-old girl who is of Afro-Caribbean origin. She's just had her hair cut short because her white foster carer finds it difficult to manage. Now, on first reading, you might think, okay, so it's just an issue of hair. What's the problem there? But then you start to think about the issues around cultural identity, about what that girl's feelings in terms of having her hair cut short. There are maybe issues around training needs for the foster carer and managing that. So there's lots going on in something that initially sounds quite innocuous. But again, what you've done is you've prioritised and made decisions in the context of knowing a tiny bit of information about each of these different scenarios. But it does show the complexity of the issues that social workers have to deal with every day.
Yeah. The other thing, you see, if you go on the post, on the page and look at all the results and see the comments that I put, that you know, I said the one that got the most votes was the tiny baby. Actually, the one that got second most votes was a 6-year-old. The one that got third most votes was a 4-year-old. And there seems to be something about age here in terms of kind of agency and the ability to have a voice and that certainly comes across in the results. So some of the scenarios that would be kind of slightly older children seem to kind of gather less votes. But nobody would suggest for a second that just because you're a slightly older child doesn't mean you're at risk or vulnerable in any ways. And again, just to reiterate that bit about to make more kind of fully rounded assessments, kind of be it social workers, child protection workers, or community workers, whoever was involved in these cases, they go into a kind of far more detailed assessment and information gathering process before coming to decisions. So thanks for making thanks for voting, thanks for making the comments and explaining why. And if you want to put any follow-up comments on the page where the results are about anything you're surprised or not surprised about, then keep that conversation going.
Definitely. And actually, one thing I would say is that it's very affirming generally about the forum posts and your levels of participation is that the level of concern that you show in terms of your reflection on the issues suggests to me that for those of you that are considering child and youth care careers or are involved in the kind of caring and helping professions already, that's quite affirming. I was quite relieved in terms of the language that's used of concern and people's anxiety about the situations that Billy finds himself in, and we'll come on to speak about him later on, but also just in terms of the scenarios that were posted. So that is encouraging, most definitely.
Okay, thank you. Right, we're going to move on to some of the more general questions that people posted in relation to the live stream event today. So thanks to the people that are making comments and posting. And we're going to start with Victoria Watson. Thanks for your post, Victoria. She posted a kind of number of questions. We're going to just kind of focus on one in particular. So Victoria asked about how might caregivers be assessed on their capacity to tolerate difficult behaviours. What would you look for? And I mean, we were chatting about this beforehand when we were deciding what we wanted to talk about, and it's a really interesting question, Victoria. And you know, the term caregivers, we could be talking here about foster carers, we could be talking about residential childcare workers, we could talk about carers in a kind of a variety of sense. And actually, when we were chatting beforehand, John Paul, we versed into talking about adoptive parents as well. And it's a really kind of complex issue in terms of kind of trying to assess the kind of who's going to have the qualities, the skills, the capabilities. And Victoria, you use the word, we'll use the phrase there to tolerate difficult behaviour. Tolerate is an interesting word. Within that, we need carers who are able to manage, respond to, understand. Because a lot of the children and young people that enter into kind of care systems, their pre-care experiences that bring them there, actually when we begin to know the story that a lot of the children and young people bring with them, their behaviour is perfectly logical in terms of their kind of prior experience. So we need carers that can both manage that but actually understand it in an empathetic way, but still put in place appropriate controls, boundaries, and that's a complex mix to achieve all of that.
Oh, it is, absolutely. And actually, Victoria, one of the challenges I think is in terms of children and young people globally receiving holistic support who have particular issues is actually for other professional disciplines to have those skills and qualities equally as much as foster carers or residential care workers. For example, so that when a child goes to school, are teachers able to adequately deal with those behaviours that present and understand the impact of trauma and the causes of trauma and the impact of deficits of kind of the absence of care and love that they have experienced, and the impact of trauma on the brain, particularly in those formative years between 0 and 4, where in terms of the plasticity of the brain, that the most damage happens, that requires many years of skilled work and support and love and affection to be able to adequately support children and young people. So there's a real need for all professionals that touch the lives of our children and young people to have those skills, to have those qualities, and to be coming at it from a similar value base. And that's one of the biggest challenges of professional practice, regardless of what country in the world you're in and regardless of what profession you're in, but having that common shared support and understanding of the child's needs and views of the child's absolutely critical, Graham.
And I wonder if it's also as well, given that Victoria's question talks about caregivers and the difference that are the potentially extra demands of, for instance, being a foster carer supposed to being a social worker, and the obvious difference being kind of social workers will see children and young people, well, we're talking here about a kind of Scottish context or a UK context, maybe if they're lucky, sometimes once a week or less than that. So the amount of contact time, whereas a foster carer will be spending 24 hours a day potentially with kind of children and young people. So the requirement in terms of kind of foster carers, kind of care, the resilience, their ability to provide that care, affection, love, alongside the understanding, the boundaries, the control issues that need to be managed. It's a hugely challenging package,
hugely complex,
and certainly in a Scottish and a UK context, a number of local authorities continually struggling to recruit enough suitably skilled foster carers. We quite often see local authorities and private organisations on quite big recruitment campaigns, because we need more foster carers as a society. And again, I mean, you'll hear us mention this kind of continually in these live streams. Also, we're based here at the University of Strathclyde in Glasgow in Scotland, so we'll be talking largely from a kind of a Scottish or UK perspective. But we know that we've got learners from kind of all around the world, so we would always be encouraging you to think about, well, how do some of these issues play out in your countries, in your settings? So if you're not based in the UK, what sort of kind of caregiving arrangements are in place, and kind of what processes are in place for the recruitment, the assessment, and perhaps crucially the support of caregivers.
I was just thinking that
ongoing support.
That ongoing support from social workers to deal with families and provide the support at the point, not just at the point of crisis, but that ongoing support, ongoing training, and actually to continue to make assessments. One of the things that Graham and I were considering earlier was the challenge of when someone goes into foster care, for example, at a very early age, and then as they go into kind of formative years, behaviours start to manifest themselves. And of course, those foster carers will have been recruited based on their skills and qualities that they presented 5-6 years ago at an interview process and a screening process and through assessment. But actually, have they really been tested until they're actually doing it? And then actually, I suppose, like any parent, for those of you that are parents, I wonder how your training was for parenting just before you started. I thought maybe that was the case. So there's real challenges in terms of the complexity of parenting.
So thanks for that question, Victoria. And again, if you want to come back and comment on, or anybody wants to come back and comment on anything we've been saying, please do so. I'm going to jump to a question from Pauline Stewart. Pauline, thanks for your question. And she was talking about kind of being interested in some of the themes from the first 2 weeks, and talking about the link between risk and vulnerability in children and attachment and containment. And also in week 2, Wales will be hearing about attachment and containment. Laura Steckley offered some material on containment, and Judy Furniville in relation to attachment. And in many ways, I mean, the reason that we include that content in week 2 is that what do we know about a number of children who either come into the care system or be it on a kind of foster care or kind of residential full-time basis, or on a kind of support basis. Well, a lot of these children and young people are in contact with these services because of their pre-care experiences, which typically involves care that's been less than ideal, which has caused disrupted or problematic attachments, and those young people at times to feel actually very uncontained in terms of the support structures that are round about them. And it's a consistent feature for many of the children and young people that services will find themselves trying to support.
Absolutely.
And that then becomes a challenge in terms of kind of young people, especially if that's been, if those feelings have been uncontained and uncared for, have been long going, about kind of trust issues amongst children and young people. And I can certainly kind of think of a lot of children and young people that I've worked with who have been kind of quite wary of kind of opening themselves up to a new set of carers or a new staff team or a new social worker. And again, when I used the phrase earlier on about behaviour being perfectly logical, actually, if you're fairly young and your repeated experiences of kind of placement breakdown or key staff members or social workers moving on, then actually those feelings of kind of wariness about putting yourself out there again to begin
to build that trust. I mean, one of the biggest challenges, I mean, you've absolutely nailed it there, is that so for many different reasons, and we'll go on to explore this as you go through the course, but some of it's down to financial reasons, but quite often there are many changes of foster carers, changes of placement type, breakdown, movement between residential care and foster care and child care. And constantly young people that are in care are asked to tell their stories, to talk about their issues constantly to multiple different professionals. And that becomes very hard for them in terms of having to disclose their deepest, darkest, most traumatic secrets again and again. So that's a big issue that children in care experience daily, and that definitely happens globally. So we need to do more to minimise that and have continuity of professional relationships and care. It's absolutely crucial.
And we know when and this isn't just children, when anybody feels uncontained, unsafe, uncared for, then that can spiral into kind of challenging and problematic issues in a whole lots of ways. But again, thinking about the typical pre-care experiences of the children we're talking about here, that it'll often be repeated instances of that. So we can link this back to the last question in terms of kind of how we need to train and support over the long-term caregivers, because change is absolutely possible for children and young people, but there's often more likely no easy fix. It's going to be long term, and there will be ups and downs, there will be peaks and troughs in that journey, and caregivers need a support and a resilience to allow them to achieve that over the long term.
Absolutely. Having a trauma-informed perspective on how to support children who are struggling with issues is absolutely critical. And it's at the heart of good relational child and youth care practice. It's so important.
So thanks for that question, Pauline. And again, it's something, I mean, we could sit and speak about that for the whole 40 minutes as well. I just want to make a reference to one other kind of question we got, and that was from Esther Bennett. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly there, Esther. And you'd said that you'd like to know more about Billy's formative years and support systems. So without giving too much away, if you tune into week 3 of Billy's story, we'll begin to get some more information.
Yeah, we're not doing spoilers, but that was a very good attempt to cut to the end of the story many weeks far too early. Right. So you'll have to stay with us.
So let's talk about Billy's story. So we're 2 weeks in, and we say this is the 6th run now of Caring for Vulnerable Children, and every time we do this, Billy's story generates an awful lot of comments, and I actually know, again, what's typical in this one, a lot of people kind of getting quite invested in the story. And Billy, it's probably important to say that this is obviously a fictionalised, created story for the purpose of the course, but it's absolutely based in reality, and there are literally thousands of families out there experiencing issues similar to Billy and his family. So that's why we're using it and we're including it. So whilst Billy is not real in that sense, there are many Billys out there needing kind of support and protection. And we've pulled out a couple of comments that people have posted following the week 2 kind of scenario. And the first comment was from Scott Williamson. So Scott, thanks for your comment. You said a few things. I just want to kind of pick out a couple of bits in particular, because I think they are really important. It's worth emphasising. You spoke about Billy not fully understanding what was wrong with his mother, and it being hard for him to understand what was going on, and how sometimes he could experience that as rejection. I think that's a really important point about the demands and the challenges that his mum's kind of poor mental health is kind of placing on Billy, and kind of how much sense he can actually kind of make of that. And then we could link this to the previous question about kind of feelings of containment and the impact on the relationship. So kind of linking that to attachment as well, and we begin to see how this is all connected. And Scott goes on to say that it will play a massive factor in these relationship and attachment issues with his mum. So here's an example of kind of, I guess, kind of outside factors impacting upon those relationships. So I think it's important that for you to highlight them, Scott. You also highlight the fact that there is another kind of key supportive factor there that's evident, and that's Mr. Merton, the guidance teacher at school, and kind of saying it's nice to see that that's there, but getting a sense that Billy's going to need a lot of support. But again, recognising the need for those significant relationships that children and young people need.
It's interesting though, one of the things just to pick up on, and it's common across many of the posts, is that Scott observed that feeling of anger towards the father, and considering that the father was letting Billy down in terms of not being able to be there for him. And I suppose the only thing that I would say, and it's just part of that being a good relational child and youth care practitioner, is thinking about all the facts of a case. And we don't really know, we're not presented with any of the information about why Billy's father's not there, or what his feelings are, or what the connection or relationship is with the family, and all the circumstances that led to that. So I suppose it's just a plea in terms of, yes, that emotion and that visceral response is perfectly understandable on a human level, but as a professional, moving into the profession, we need to just think about understanding that whole picture and that whole pattern, and not rush to make judgments. But it's hard, and if you can master that, then you can probably master the art of being a good child and youth care practitioner. But it's good that you care, and it's good that you've got that level of response.
And that is a constant challenge, I think, many residential workers and child and youth care workers face when they see children and young people experiencing difficult relationships. It could be with parents, it could be with significant others, and sometimes they see the children being let down in some way, i.e., in the example we've got in the scenario here is perhaps not turning up for visits and things like that. And as a worker, they're left trying to console and contain young people who are kind of experiencing kind of hurt and anger. And in that situation, it's perfectly understandable that the workers kind of feel that anger towards that parent or the significant other who's let the child down.
And I suppose that's probably one of the most important reasons why child and youth care practitioners, social workers, and other people in helping professions have good, effective supervision and support from their line managers, because they are human and have that impact, are affected by the issues that they face day in, day out, and they need to be able to process that with a manager or a supporting person in an organisation or out with, so that they process their own emotions and don't let them become impactful on their professional practice.
So thanks for that comment, Scott. And we've got another comment from Susie Buckley. So Susie, thanks for posting your comment about Billy. And she raised the question about kind of Billy appearing to have no friends, and certainly in the first 2 weeks of the story, we kind of heard that there's kind of a limited kind of peer network there. I think that's really kind of important observation, Susie. And when we're kind of thinking about, again, go back to kind of relationships, attachment, containment, and we know that kind of friendship, especially kind of peer friendships and relationships, can be a kind of a very kind of supportive factor. But also, again, without giving too much away, but even just in the first 2 weeks, learners are already getting a sense of kind of Billy having a lot on his plate in terms of responsibilities towards mum and things like that, and that experience of a young person being required to be a carer. And we do know that one of the impacts for many young carers is that it is acting as a barrier and allowing them to develop that full network of friendships and peer relationships that we might like them to have.
Absolutely. I mean, sorry, Graham.
I was just going to get partly because of just sheer time, but also actually kind of, many young carers can feel different or awkward in that sense because they see themselves in a different scenario to many peers, and that acts as a bit of an inhibitor to them kind of feeling able to kind of open up and different kind of friendship situations.
Absolutely. And most of the research literature tells us that young people who have good supportive friendship networks and are actively involved in community engagement and leisure activities are more likely to be more resilient and have stronger levels of social capital. And actually, in terms of employment trajectories and further education, learning, university possibilities, those with stronger networks and participation are more likely to succeed and thrive than those who are vulnerable and isolated. So the point, Susie, is absolutely an astute one in terms of that need to think about the support networks. And actually for children in care, as they move from different care homes, they may move different geographical areas, they might even have to move country in some cases. Think about the disruption that has to already established relationships and networks and membership of groups and clubs and associations. And actually those factors should probably form and do form in many cases, but not necessarily always prominently, a part of the decision making that's made about children and young people in terms of placements when they're needing additional care and support. So yeah, it's a really good point, really good.
So thanks for that comment, Susie. And actually, just the very last thing you say, again, without giving any spoilers away, Susie spoke about a suggestion for any support worker would be to try and find a hobby for Billy and thinking about meeting people his own age. So again, without giving too much away, kind of watch this space in terms of kind of where Billy's story goes to. But good points. Thank you. As we come towards the end of it, I guess another thing we want to touch on is the issue of kind of the connection between children, risk, vulnerability, and poverty. And right at the beginning of week one, we have some material on poverty, and the introduction to Billy's story kind of talks about some of the statistics in Scotland in relation to children in poverty. And I'm realising I've got a piece of paper that you don't have here. So I want to ask you to comment on this, John Paul. And on your sixth run of this, and at the end of week one, at the end of every week, there's a post about kind of how's the week been for you, and people post their general reflections. And I flicked through that again at the end of week one, and every time I've run this course, one of the most consistent features of that of the post there is that I'm really shocked about the number of children in poverty in Scotland. I had no idea, and a lot of these comments coming from Scottish participants, but also other people comment on kind of comparable issues. I've just put here, Catherine Chabauskas, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correct there, Catherine. The statistics for the Scottish children has shocked me, and that came up front. Audrey Duggan, again, Audrey, thanks for your comments. She described the statistics around children living in poverty and children as sobering. And Nicola Cunningham, again, Nicola, thanks for your comment. She said the same thing, that she wasn't surprised, and that's based on her experience of kind of teaching in various schools in Scotland. And this is something that we'll talk about consistently across the 6 weeks of the programme. And we don't want this to turn into a kind of party political broadcast in that sense, but the statistics are kind of quite sobering. I mean, just very recently, kind of new statistics that came out in Scotland. So this is taken from the Child Poverty Action Group. They're talking about more than 1 in 4 of Scotland's children are officially recognised as living in poverty. That's over 260,000 children in Scotland, over a quarter of the kind of children population in Scotland. And so, in a sense, when you hear those statistics, I'm not surprised we're getting comments kind of talking about surprise, shock, sobering. Although there is a bit of an issue about how do not more of us know about this? This is you could call this a national scandal, but it still goes on.
The numbers of, I mean, 3, 4, 5 years ago in Scotland, we had no food banks, and these have been established by kind of voluntary agencies now, where people are actually needing basic help and foodstuffs in order to feed their children and basically survive. So we are seeing a huge increase in the levels of poverty. And I think just to prove how live and current we are and this course is for you, Graham, I think you found something of interest earlier.
So this is in today's, for those you not in the UK, the Guardian is kind of one of our national newspapers. And I mean, you can get this free online if you go into the Guardian website, and the article's called "The Britain's Child Social Care System is Quietly Being Dismantled." And one of the reasons, I mean, there's a lot of scary content in it, and it's comment on a report that was published yesterday by the National Children's Bureau, talking about services for vulnerable children, and it's just talking about how they've been cut. And I'm not going to read through all the statistics, but it's talking about kind of various different resources and funding and how it's all going both in communities and schools for families. And just a couple of quotes. This is from the newspaper articles. There's also a comment on the report, but talking about the system designed to help the country's most vulnerable children. And that's probably what made it jump out at me in terms of using the word vulnerable in the tie-in with our course here, but talking about how the system designed to help the country's most vulnerable children is being dismantled. And the kind of some of the kind of final comments here about the public services being cut, pushing hundreds of thousands more children into poverty, and and think about the material we were asking you to engage in, especially in week 1, and we'll come back to this much more in week 5 and week 6 as well. We know the link between poverty and care and protection issues and vulnerability for children and young people, and we know there's a direct link there, and what's happening in the UK parallels what's happening in many other places in the world just now in terms of kind of cuts to budgets for services, trying to work with and support the most vulnerable families and communities, and the people that are most disproportionately impacted upon that by are women and children. And the statistics don't tell us anything else. So it's again, I come back to the word such as kind of sad and sobering. It is sad that the course continues to be so topical in that sense. I guess ideally we would like this course to be out of date. We would like the statistics to start heading in a different direction and us having to change what we're saying about the need in society. But sadly, when reports such as this, probably so. I mean, I would encourage you either. I mean, go to the Guardian website, go to the National Children's Bureau website, or in the Scottish context, go to the website of the Child Poverty Action Group and look at some of the statistics there in relation to children and poverty across the UK. Or indeed, if you're a learner from somewhere else, then kind of access the statistics as they apply in your setting, and think about what does that mean for children and young people in relation to vulnerability and risk and protection, and what does it mean for the services, however they're organised, however they're constructed in your setting. What does this mean? Because in a UK context, it feels like we've got more people in need of support at the very time when those services are experiencing more budget cuts. So we're trying to do more with less, and that's a challenge and demanding situation for the whole sector.
Absolutely. Yes, I'd be keen to hear what your thoughts are on your own situation and in your own country in terms of your response to this and to the impact that these financial cuts may be having on services and to children's lives that are in care wherever you are.
Yeah. So that's us got to the end of our time, John Paul. So thanks very much for taking part, and thanks to everybody for posting your comments and engaging in the process. What we'd just like to take a chance to do is just to encourage you to if you've been watching this live or you're watching it the recording afterwards, there's a comment section at the bottom of that page. Keep the conversation going about kind of any of the things that we've been talking about, and I would be surprised if there wasn't people taking issue with some of the things that we said. No, none of this is an exact science. We want to engage some discussion and
it's
debate.
good to have critical thought and debate. All comments are welcome unless they are related to our Scottish accents, in which case they'll just be ignored entirely. But yes, no, I love reading the comments, so it'll be good to see them.
And then also we'll be moving on to week 3 next week, so just encourage everybody to keep engaging with the course. There'll be more polls to come. There'll be all the different comments boards, and also Billy's story will continue to unfold over the next kind of 4 weeks, taking us up to the end of 6 weeks. So we hope that you've enjoyed the course today, enjoyed this session, and we look forward to seeing you again in 2 weeks' time when we're back for our next live stream. Okay, thank you.
Goodbye.